So I have kind of a long story. So I started off with I got a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. I chose counseling psychology because in my doc program, I mean, when you're going through school, you're immediately thrown in there working with clients. But when you're doing executive coaching and the person you're working with is far more, on paper, far more successful than you are, it's difficult to tell that person how to navigate their relationships at work when I've accomplished nothing at work and they're a CEO. And you have to be a little bit deluded in your own ability to like convince yourself that you belong there. So I've been doing it for almost 15 years now. So now I would say probably all of them. I think the ones I do the most work in, it would be construction, still, and healthcare. So I would say my work with organizations falls into three buckets. One bucket is pre-hire, which is assessment.
All right, David, I am so happy that you're here. Thank you so much for being here. This is something I've been really looking forward to.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to talking with you also.
Yeah, I know the topic of industrial organizational psychology is kind of a hot topic, and it's something that a lot of my audience members have been wanting to know more about. But before we kind of get into that, how did you first get exposed to industrial organizational psychology? Like, what was your experience like when you first heard of it?
So I have kind of a long story. So I started off with I got a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, and I just wanted to be like a traditional therapist. And when I graduated, that was 2005. I started the program in 2005. I graduated in 2007, and everybody's like clamoring for a job. And I was like, well, I don't know what to do. And for no good reason other than people I looked up to got PhDs. I was like, I should go get a PhD. And so I went on that path. And I knew that I was more suited for kind of I would think about like the walking wounded versus the, more significant acuity. And I didn't want to work with really intense mental illness. And so I chose counseling psychology, which is probably like the first indicator that I maybe wasn't totally suited for traditional therapy work. Because in my doc program, I mean, when you're going through school, you're immediately thrown in there working with clients. And I worked at in my master's program, I worked at a boys' home. I worked at a community mental health center in Los Angeles, which were pretty intense populations. And then in my doc program, which was at the University of Denver, I was again working at community mental health centers. And I was just sort of noticing that I was emotionally tired at the end of the day. My supervisors I felt totally overwhelmed. They were beleaguered, felt like they were underpaid. I had a conversation with one of them, who was I really looked up to her, and she's at the top of the field and had a very strong reputation. She was a training director, for pre-doc internships. And I asked her how much she made. And I think the number she said, it was like $85,000 a year. And this was someone that had accomplished a tremendous amount. She was at the top of the game, nationally known. And I'm going like, man, I'm going to go to school 2 years master's, 5 years doctorate. And if I'm lucky and I'm at the top of my game, I'm going to make $88,000 a year if I take that path. And I know that your other option is to go private practice, but I was still aware of feeling emotionally taxed by a day of clinical work. And I was fortunate enough, I think it was my second year, I worked for the State Employee Assistance Program for Colorado. And they had a counseling program, and they also, my supervisor was also a coach and a consultant. And so I said, hey, would you mind if I do a consulting, like, can I try coaching someone or doing the consulting work? And he was like, yeah, sure you can. And I remember it very clearly. I had one day where I had somebody that had OCD, but in a very intense way, in an overwhelming way for me. Like I was sort of, at a certain point, at least for me, the treatment of intense diagnosis is oftentimes just like trying to add structure and regulate people's emotions and reducing their anxiety, but you're not really able to touch the underlying driver. And that I remember feeling like I'm making no impact with this person. And then the same day, I had a public defender who was trying to find meaning in his work and navigate a relationship with his wife and, sort of be all things to all people in his world. But this was a very high functioning, very engaged person. And I left that meeting, which was technically coaching. And I was like, that's what I want to do.
Wow.
And so at the start, I'm sorry, I'll stop talking. But so at the start of my doc program, my dissertation was going to be on spirituality and meaning making. We knew that, or it's pretty clear that having faith has a curative effect when you're taking care of someone who is sick, or if you're sick yourself. But the mechanism behind that's unclear. It's what I wanted to study. But I realized that it wasn't marketable if I wanted to go into this consulting world. So I shifted my dissertation topic to corporate culture so that I could create a study that would help me get a job later on. So anyway, that's how I made the transition.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. I mean, and I think it speaks to the incredible opportunity that you had, and it was an opportunity that you had, and you just kind of jumped right into it, and it seemed to kind of fit your personality and kind of what you were looking for. And I love that you speak about, I think, some of maybe the negative aspects of the therapy world and some of the things that people don't talk about as much, right? In terms of the salary, or in terms of how much you can easily get burnt out, and all of the different things that come along with that. What for you, right when you graduated with your doctorate, what was the transition then into the field then for you in terms of getting that more of that experience?
Yeah. So I was lucky. So I was married at the time, and my wife did well financially. So I wasn't panicked about money. And so I started the Colarossi Group, which was a consulting firm, a group of one. And then I started Colarossi Counseling at the same time. It was much easier for me to get full with the counseling practice, but the goal was always to transfer, to move to the consulting work. So I live in Denver. Where are you located?
I'm in Chicago.
Right? Or
Midwest.
Chicago, Midwest. Yep. So in Denver, one of the nicer areas is called Cherry Creek. And so I sublet, I didn't sublet an office, like a very small office there. I only work like 2 or 3 days a week. And I think my original rate was like $100 an hour. But at this time I was not licensed. I was still being supervised, which I can talk to you about in a second. But I started off at $100 an hour, and I did okay. And then I moved it to $140 an hour, and I did way better. It was like I was in the fancy area. I had a PhD, and I was charging more, and I was able to fill that practice up pretty quickly. And so I did that. And then while I was doing that work, like I said, I did my dissertation on corporate culture, in particular corporate safety culture, and I made a tool that evaluates whether or not your company has a safe culture. And I was able to sell that into construction companies. And so that's how I ended up getting my foot in the door in the consulting world.
Wow. That's pretty neat. I think it's great because it's like one of those things where I think the research that I've done in terms of industrial organizational psychology, for me, it has never been quite clear. And it always seemed like the people that were really into it were only doing sort of like these contract positions, or like, part-time, job positions. But it seemed like for you, you started from the ground up, and you were really able to kind of work your way into it. And it seemed like a lot of it had to do with maybe some private practice skills and some marketing skills to really, advocate for yourself that you knew what you were doing, and that this was something that other companies or organizations needed. And so how did you kind of, sell yourself in that way for other people to start kind of paying attention to that?
Yeah. So at the time I didn't know about IO psychology. And I still, by the way, I think the best skill set to be a consultant is counseling psychology or clinical psychology, personally. So I still think I think I had the right education. I think the skill that I have, which is maybe not a skill, but is valuable, is hubris. Because, when at least for me, when I was doing clinical work, I was emboldened, or I was maybe more confident when I was working with somebody who I knew I was functioning at a higher level than. Like, I can give you advice about reducing your anxiety if I have less anxiety than you. But when you're doing executive coaching and the person you're working with is far more, on paper, far more successful than you are, it's difficult to tell that person how to navigate their relationships at work when I've accomplished nothing at work and they're a CEO. And you have to be a little bit deluded in your own ability to like convince yourself that you belong there,
Yeah.
So I think right off the bat, that was like being a little bit, I don't think I'm an entrepreneur, but I think I am maybe more comfortable, or I was maybe more comfortable to put myself in that setting a little bit than the average psychologist, which does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, it really does. And I'm curious to know, like, what sectors or fields have you been able to kind of utilize some of those skills for you?
So now, like, I've been doing it, and so I graduated in 2012, and I started the Colarossi Group, the consulting company, officially in 2011. So I've been doing it for almost 15 years now. So now I would say probably all of them. I think the ones that I do the most work in, it would be construction still and healthcare. I do a lot of work with physicians or physician leaders. And then, the construction industry, construction, mining, those kinds of industries, there's a lot of, these companies get very big and there's a lot of leadership opportunity. And so I think those companies in those industries oftentimes are putting money towards leadership development pretty intentionally.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. I love what you mentioned in terms of like, it sounded to me a little bit like imposter syndrome of like, okay, I'm doing this thing, but like it's kind of evolving as I go through it. But then you mentioned how like for someone receiving it, who's like in that company or in that organization, like, I think we often think that they don't need that, or like they don't have the skills that we already have or that we've been taught. And I absolutely agree with you in that clinical psychology, counseling psychology, there's so many different skill sets that we're taught in graduate school that can be applicable in so many different settings. How was it in terms of, for you, is there like a favorite type of person that you enjoy working with, or a company or organization that you enjoy working with, or what about the career do you love?
Yeah. So first of all, as far as the type of person I like to work with, it's the same as when I was doing clinical work. I like people that are anxious.
Okay.
I have a harder time working with people that like if I think like a continuum from being depressed or dysthymic to somebody being anxious or energized. To me, when somebody is agitated or reactive or elevated, anxiety drives behavior. So for me, it's much easier to correct or address, or they're more motivated for change. Whereas when somebody is disinterested in coaching or disinterested in therapy, that's always harder for me.
Yeah.
So, in the which I like about doing consulting work or working with leaders is they're very motivated, and it's a different, so I don't have a specific company or industry. I would just say in general, leaders that are motivated to progress are a lot more outcome oriented, I think, than like you would see in a clinical or a counseling practice.
I was curious to know, in terms of like when you're working with these organizations and companies, is it sort of this like ongoing relationship, sort of, is it like kind of maybe a contract basis, or are they giving you perhaps specific problems where you go in and you're maybe doing some sort of analysis or some sort of assessment, and then you're individually working with people, or how does that kind of look like?
Yeah. So I would say my work with organizations falls into 3 buckets. One bucket is pre-hire, which is assessment, which is probably half of what I do. Give a battery of tools. They take, I do an interview, give them a battery of tools, or I'll do like a simulation with them. And then I write a report that says, hey, this person's a good fit, but has this characteristic, or, this is what development might look like for this person. So that's one piece of it. Oftentimes that leads to coaching, which is kind of the second bucket of things that I do. I would put it under the category of training. So that's individual coaching, or it's, topic specific training. You're going to do a training on emotional intelligence, or a training on cognitive agility, or a training on, whatever, conflict resolution. Right. Or in I guess the adjacent to training bucket would be process related training. So how do we do team building or a strategic planning session with this group, right? Where it's not like teach this thing, but it's about facilitating the conversation. And then the last bucket would be organization-wide kind of OD stuff. That's where you're doing like change management or scenario planning or network analysis, and that's probably 20% of what I do. I don't think my percentage is added up there, but roughly that's the breakdown.
I got you. Okay. No, very cool. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something where that in terms of kind of where you see the field heading, like where you maybe even where you see yourself heading in terms of certain aspirations in the specific field that you can kind of picture and imagine?
That's a good question. Where I see the field, I guess I have two. I think that the field, I don't know if this is in particular IO psychology, but I'll just talk generally about psychology. I have been frustrated or I'm annoyed a little bit with the psychologists in general, or the mental health practitioners in general, because I feel like we don't always do a good job of standing by our training when we're evaluating dynamics with people. And I feel like we are sliding to a place where we're just pandering to the milieu. We're just pandering to social media. And it's like, I'm not sure that that's what we actually believe. And I'll give you some examples about like the one that's standing out to me is this idea of work from home. So, Adam Grant, Simon Sinek, everybody during COVID was like, and they're still sort of beating the drum of work from home is fantastic. It makes people happier, and that's what we should do. And I think that if they were intellectually honest, they would recognize that it's not a good thing long-term for the culture of organizations. And then as a result, global satisfaction of these people. And I think they know that, but it's unpopular right now to say, get back to work. And so I don't think that they don't tell a full story about it. They just sort of say, hey, let people do what they want because they're more fulfilled. Like it's a very individual focused thing.
Mm-hmm.
The other example I have in my mind that drives me crazy is this idea of, which I have heard my entire career, that impact is more important than intent. Like, have you heard that language before? Right?
I have, yeah.
And everybody believes it. And when you say it, it sounds good, but I don't think that it's how clinicians think. What matters, I think it's very important to a therapist what objectively happened. The most common therapeutic approach would be, I think, is CBT. I don't know if it's the most popular. I think it's the most popular. I don't have the data behind that, but a lot of people think about pathology in that way. And when you go to see a therapist and you say, hey, I had this event, the therapist is going to work on what was the event that triggered you? What was your emotional reaction? How did you behave? And what was the consequence? Was that a good chain of events? The therapist is trying to help the individual regulate intentionally, was my response to that stimulus appropriate or not? So clinically, we value very much what actually happened. What we need to know. If I told you I got in a fight with my wife and she reacted in an unreasonable way, your first thought would be, well, what was the fight about? Was it really unreasonable, or was it to act like what happened doesn't matter and it's just about the impact is to me, it's insincere. Do you know what I mean? And so I feel a little bit like that's the trend. And I think it's maybe more top of mind to me because doing work as in the IO psych in the consulting space, companies hire me to do coaching because they want to change in performance.
Right.
So they're going, this is the behavior we're seeing. It needs to change. Can you help this person? Which is a very different lens than if you're doing therapy. Because in therapy, the goal is improving well-being globally or satisfaction globally. And so it's really easy to be like, hey, well, if you like that, then that's fine. No judgment, unconditional positive regard. You're not intervening with the same level of intensity, I don't think, in therapy as you might in the business world.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a lot more direct, it's a lot more focused. And I think I think it probably opens up a lot of space for honesty and
Yeah.
just being candid with your client about, hey, this is what needs to be done. And perhaps, I think in that there's a lot of transparency of like being able to collaborate in that way.
Mhm.
So I was thinking about it in terms of like, let's say for schooling, graduate school, what do you think would have been helpful for you in learning in graduate school that you wish you would have been able to just get to help you kind of on the trajectory that you're in right now?
That's a great question. Um, that's a really good question. What do I think one thing that stands out to me is the idea that, I think at least for me, there's a thing in how I approach work or approach people where I will, and I'm thinking, what I'm reflecting on is sort of how I worked with my cohort and what that looks like moving forward. And I think that when you get into the program, at least for me, I had a cohort of 6 people, and you start off and you're like very connected to that group. And then as things progress, you sort of splinter and everybody's doing different things. And I feel like I didn't do as good a job as I should have maintaining those relationships afterwards, because I don't talk to anybody from my it's been whatever, a decade or so, but I don't have that. Those were really good people, clinicians I really valued, but I was so focused on, I got to figure out my career and what I'm doing, that you sort of move on without those relationships. And then now at this stage of the game, I have a different group that I consult, or that I neglected those relationships, I think, in my sort of, I did the same thing after high school. I'm not good
Yeah.
at like staying on top of relationships. And I think it's less about the field of psychology, but just stylistically for me, I wish I had done that differently.
Got you. Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That kind of leads into my next question,
Mhm.
because I'm thinking about like for you, like for me right now, I have supervisors, I have other people that I can go to for consultation and things like that. It seems like the space of IO and even what you specifically do is so niche that you may not have a lot of colleagues that you can go to perhaps consult or and so forth. Do you feel like there's a network of people or mentors that you can go to get advice or consultation in terms of what you do?
So I do. So I don't work. I started off on my own. And then I was on my own. I joined a small boutique consulting firm. I went on my own again for a couple of years. And then I joined a company called CMA Global. They're based in St. Louis, have offices in Kansas City and in Denver. And it's like a 45 person, 50 person firm. And I think 23 of us are psychologists and consultants. And so being the reason why I joined the firm, there's a couple of reasons. One was I wanted to learn about assessments and get better at the kind of OD, strategic planning, change management type of work. And I wanted I needed what you're talking about. I needed the connection to people. So at CMA, there's a Denver office that I go to every day that has psychologists in it. And then our whole firm gets together once a month for a full day where we calibrate on how we do coaching, how we do assessments. So I get a lot of that connection by
Incredible.
being part of CMA.
That's incredible. Is there any advice that you have for high schooler, someone in college who's looking into going into this field, into this space? What are some of maybe the classes that they should be thinking about, or some of the steps that they should take to get into it?
It's funny. I'd be curious what you say, how you view this. But for me, like I have 2 boys. If they, one's 9, the other one's 5, so we got some time. But if they said they wanted to go to school and get a bachelor's degree in psychology, which I did, I would be, man, let them do whatever they want, but I would be opposed to it because I think I think it's like you could do it, but just know a 4-year degree in psychology, I think, gets you nothing. You have to go to grad school, and you got to really like it and be committed to it.
Right.
So that'd be my suggestion: is like just know you're going to go to grad school. You've got to be all in on this thing. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I can totally relate to that. So it's actually a neuroscience major, but you know, obviously overlaps a lot with psychology. And I enjoyed it. I don't have a linear path towards clinical psychology. I actually wanted to become a dentist. So I was a neuroscience major, yeah, and I was a sort of like a pre-dental major, and I actually went into dental school for about a year and a half before I decided that I did not want to do it and switched to clinical psychology after that. So going into college, I always had sort of this long-term goal of like just knowing that I was just going to be in school forever. But I think that for me is what it took to be able to just grind through it, get through college, get through grad school. You know, it's like, okay, I know that this is going to be a long haul. And I think sometimes people don't really think about that. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. How did you, I know this is off topic, I'm just curious. So tell me about YouTube. How did you decide to do YouTube?
Yeah, so that was super random as well. When I was looking at clinical psychology, I was trying to gather as much information as I could. So I was going online. I was actually calling a bunch of clinical psychologists in my area. Not a ton of them were taking my calls back, but there was one that did call me back. And I was just trying to learn as much as I could. And so when I finally got into graduate school, I thought to myself, man, I wish that there was some sort of education field of like resource on YouTube where, you know, someone could like show people, hey, like this is what you need to think about in your interviews and in your applications and all of these other things. I didn't really see that on YouTube. And so I started doing it, didn't think anything would come out of it. And I just started getting so many questions. Like people just started hitting me up, and I was like, all right, I guess I'll make some space out of this. Like this is really cool.
Smart.
I think I get to help people.
Yeah.
So I know I actually found you on YouTube as well, and you have a incredible popular YouTube channel. I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that in terms of how that started with all of the other things that you're doing, obviously.
Yeah. So, I mean, similar kind of by accident. So I did so during COVID, you know, it was like locked away. And so I made a rule in my house that everybody had to learn something. You know, do each month we had to learn something. Like one kid's going to learn how to draw or whatever. And I was trying to figure out, how do I stay connected with clients that are not, you know, not reaching out, they're not doing coaching. Everybody's sort of like, you know, batten down the hatches. So I wanted to learn how to edit videos. So I was making like little advertisements. Like I would get on a suit and get on the Peloton and then or lift weights. And then I would send a video of me and I would say, I know you haven't seen me, but I'm still working. And I was like, I was trying to find funny videos. So I learned the skill of how to edit videos. And then my wife really liked Rachel Hollis. Do you know who Rachel Hollis is?
I don't think so.
She's a personal development influencer, and her husband were really, like, I thought, over the top about how great the relationship was. And they're just sort of pumping out personal development content. My wife loved it. And I was like, do whatever you want. But at like halfway through, I don't know, like 4 months into COVID, Rachel and Dave Halls, her husband, got divorced. And my wife was like really upset about it. And so I go like, you gotta be kidding me. So I recorded a video, just reacting to whatever. I don't know what made me do it. It's like, I'm just gonna record a video and just put it on YouTube. And that video did really well. It got like 30,000 views. And it was just me reacting to this like event in pop culture. And so, you know, another thing that that I'm aware of in myself is that I get distracted easily. Like I start stuff and then don't keep doing it. And so I was like, I want to force myself to be committed to YouTube for a year. Let's see if I can stay dedicated to something for a year, which I did. And the channel just grew. And the goal for me is just make sure that you're recording at least one video a week, which it's now been, like 3 years. And it's grown pretty well, and it's a fun thing. And, you know, I have the Pop Psych YouTube channel, which is the popular one. And then I started a David Colarossi PhD YouTube channel, which has not been a popular one, which I'm like less motivated to do. But you know, YouTube is a hard space to do well in. you know?
It's such a, yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I can relate too, because I do have a second YouTube channel as well.
Oh, you
Because
do?
yeah, I do. I'm a part-time personal trainer. And so I do virtual training sessions for people. I train people in person as well. So I started that second YouTube channel and it hasn't done well at all. So
Yeah.
it's like this algorithm, you just never know. You never
Yeah.
know what people are going to like, what people are not going to
Mhm.
like. You're just kind of go with the flow. So,
Yeah.
uh,
For me, it's really hard because I would do these videos on the David Colarossi channel. And it would take me, like, I think 15 hours. Now I'm working full time. It would take me a long time to record and edit. I'm trying to talk about whatever. I'm trying to talk about whatever, I'm trying to think of what experiment I was doing, but some experiment, and I was trying to react to this experiment, the bystander effect experiment. And then, you know, 300 people see it after like 6 months, and you're like, oh my God, I spent all that time. Versus I could do a pop psych, I can go react to Sister Wives, and it does much better, and it's very low effort. You know what I mean? And so it's hard. And then you feel like you're getting like I'm being distorted by the algorithm, which is kind of a shame, right? And you want people to be able to just do what they want to do.
Right,
So
right.
I'm aware of that happening. You know,
it's a really interesting phenomenon. I was thinking about it too, like in terms of, kind of what you do for work and what you've kind of done for your career so far. Is there anything in particular that you've learned about either people or just, organizations in general that you didn't really like, that was new for you in terms of perhaps a certain quality or characteristic that was interesting?
I have two things that stand out. The first was when you're saying the question, the first thing that stood out to me was when I graduated, speaking of the imposter syndrome, I was like, I don't belong working with these companies at all. And one of my very first jobs was I hadn't done any coaching with this company, but they wanted me to do these. So when it was a large general contractor, and they do these, if they're building a hospital or whatever, a lot of times the large general contractor will partner with subcontractors. Someone's going to do the concrete, someone's doing electrical, someone's doing HVAC. And they want to figure out how well are we partnering across these different companies that are all building this hospital. And so they would survey everybody, and I would write a presentation of, hey, here's what communication looks like. Here's what, and I got this assignment, and I'm sitting here doing like, okay, we got to do a regression, and what are the mediating factors that, right? And I submit, and they're like, what the hell is this? All they wanted was mean. Like the statistical analysis that they wanted was what you learn in fourth grade. Wow. They wanted a psychologist to do it. They liked the PhD, but the statistical analysis was very exceptionally basic. And I think that that's a really important dynamic, is that I think psychologists we're so undervalue what we do that we're like, it has to be bigger and better and more complicated and more, there's got to be nuance, and let me just tweak this thing. And in the business world, they're just like, just shoot me straight. What's happening? They don't want any, do you know what I mean? It's like simple is really, really valued, and complexity and nuance are a problem.
I think that's fascinating, because I think even in my own program, when they're teaching us like assessment, like psychodiagnostic testing or neuropsychological testing, a lot of times I feel like us as clinicians can write in a certain way where we're trying to impress one another. But, we're writing to the wrong audience. Like, really what we're writing for is to the patients and to the clients. And we want to be as simple and as parsimonious as possible, because we want to be able to communicate what's actually going on, and we want them to be able to understand it. And it's just interesting when I've worked with other medical professionals. So you have physicians or nurse practitioners, and it's like they want the same thing. They want as simple as possible. They don't care if your report is 12 to 15 pages long and has like all of this elaborate, terminology. So
I probably write. I think I write a lot of assessments. I'm I'm gonna guess per year. I mean, it's probably, I would say that per month, I'm probably writing like 25 reports.
Wow.
And I've been doing that for years, right? I have never, ever had anybody compliment me ever once on a well-written report. Never.
Right.
If there's any critique, positive is this makes sense, thank you.
Yeah.
And negative is I don't quite understand what, like, you got this wrong or this doesn't seem right, right? No one cares at all what the writing is like. And I used to spend so much time like trying to be eloquent. And I had one of my supervisors at CMA was like, what do you do? No one cares. Just get the answer right. Like that's what we care about is getting the answer right. But how fancy you are in your language is not valued at all.
Right.
But you're right.
Yeah.
In academia, it is. And so you get people bloviating about things in their writing that doesn't really, Yeah.
There was one thing I also wanted to ask you about in terms of technology. Like obviously, technology is continually increasing in terms of people using it and also just it advancing. And now with AI developing and evolving and things like that, is there, first of all, do you use certain forms of technology for your type of job, or do you see, like, how do you see technology being embedded within IO and things like that?
So the only one that what I use now would just be ChatGPT. I think it's helpful for some research. I don't know if you can always trust it, but it's helpful for research. What I do most sort of practically is if I'm writing an email that's important, I'll put it in there and say, edit this. Like I have a hard time if I say, some people will be like, just put the bullets and they're going to write it for you. I never like it. But if I write it, I'll say, will you clean up the grammar and the spelling? And I like it. I use it for that purpose. I think for IO psychology or for my business, I think it definitely has the potential to upset the assessment work that I do at the lower level. Because what they're paying for now is, the tools that I use are not my tools, are not CMA's tools. These are tools that are readily available on the market. What they're paying for is to have a psychologist look at 4 or 5 assessments at once and write a report. I think there's a risk that people go, hey, can AI do that? And I don't know that it can, but I think that there's the potential of, at some level, what a psychologist is doing is just like when we're looking at multiple assessments, it's just pattern recognition, right? Like I sort of know this look. I think that's a risk for lower level assessments when they're wanting to cut costs. I don't think at the executive level that I think they still like to have a human that's running somebody through a simulation or that's doing interviews and writing a very tailored approach or a tailored report. But I think it has the potential to disrupt the lower level stuff that we do.
That's that's really interesting. I never thought about that. I always imagined too, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it seems like if you split apart industrial and organizational, industrial is very much like you're working with people, you're working with individuals, whereas the organizational is sort of like the systems that are kind of either embedded in the company or in the organization. And so for me, if I'm kind of looking through the lens of someone who's in a company, I feel like those two things have to come together. And I feel like a psychologist can do that in a beautiful way of like bringing that technology and bringing the humanity side of things together in a way that makes sense. And so, I just think it's interesting to see how it will kind of evolve and progress.
I don't know. I went to, there's a conference called Leading Edge. It's an IO Psych conference I went to in October. And what was really interesting is they were saying that the biggest risk for disruption is the development of assessments. So right now, if you're making a tool, you have to conjure up all of these items.
Right.
And now you can use AI to say, hey, write me 70 items that are measuring emotional intelligence. And then, like when you make a tool, when I made a tool for my dissertation, I made up a bunch of items and then I gave those items to master's level psychology students and said, which of these items do you think measure these components of corporate culture? And I used their expert review. Now they're saying you can use another AI bot to evaluate the first items that were developed by a separate AI. You take AI bot 1 to create the items, then take AI bot 2 to evaluate the items, and then you can do the whole thing via AI. And they're saying you can create a pretty robust tool and never have to do any. You're never having to research with people. Never having any conversations. AI just does it itself. It's pretty crazy.
Wow. That's insane. I can't even, that's mind blowing. I never even considered that. That's
me neither.
Like that could happen.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, in general, I think I've learned a lot, so much from this conversation, David. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that you've learned from in this field that you're excited about, or that you're doing that you want people to know about?
Yeah. Well, I think for your channel, I don't know. This is not going to be I have a counterculture view that we haven't talked about because of what your channel talks about. I think this would be helpful. I think that like I said before, I think psychologists really undervalue themselves, and I think that the APA and the way that licensure happens is a racket. I think that it, and I'm a licensed psychologist. I think that it really distorts the way that training should happen. And so the big one that stands out to me is this idea of a postdoc internship. So you're going to graduate, you're going to get a pre-doc internship. I get it. You have to do that. And then you're going to write your dissertation. You have a PhD, and then they're going to say, we're going to pay you the same rate that we just paid you this last year. Now that you're a psychologist, and you're going to do it again so that you get hours towards licensure, and then you can take this test, which is a crazy assessment. And it's like, so for me, I did not get a postdoc. I just go, no, thank you. I'll get my own supervisor to supervise my work, and you can do it on your own. And so I feel like there's a little bit of, I guess my recommendation would be, I don't think that it's always best to just follow the machine. You know what I mean? That's cranking people out. I think so. Right. That's my last parting comment.
No, I appreciate that honesty, because I've actually heard it from other supervisors and other psychologists as well. Even with the EPPP, it's kind of one of those things where you have so many competent psychologists who end up taking that exam multiple times just because it's just like a weird test to study for, and it's not indicative of their proficiency or compeence at all as a psychologist.
Of nothing.
Yeah. Right. And
my recommendation is don't study for it. If you're clinically trained, this is the way I approach it. If you're clinically trained, that helps you on that section of the test. The problem is the test is made because psychology is a huge, broad field, and they say, hey, health psychologists, what's important for your field? IO psychologists, what's important for yours? Counseling psychologists, what's important for you, right? So you end up getting this massive test where, I'm being tested on Parkinson's, has nothing to do with the work that I do, but I have to know it's just too much. And so what I would say is just be really pragmatic. You have to get like a 70%, I think. The ethics are really important. You already know the DSM, so don't worry about it. Don't waste time studying that. If you know it well enough, just breeze over the things that you don't know and just take it. And if you fail, just take it again the next quarter. Like I had colleagues that were doing like 40 hours a month studying for that thing. It's crazy.
Wow.
That's my
way. No, I appreciate that, because it's interesting for me. Like when I first got into grad school, I didn't realize too that even when you were talking about the internship, it made me think about, like, for most programs, after they finish the doctorate, or after they finish the 4 years or whatever, they graduate. And like for us, it's like you go through the 4 years or the 6 years of school, and then you go through the internship, and then you don't graduate until after the internship. And then even after you graduate after the internship, you still have to fulfill the hours perhaps for licensure or for the postdoc.
Right.
But then, like you said, like you're still paid on a much lower salary, even though you know how to do the work just as well as any other psychologist. And so I think those are good things to think about for people who are looking into this field. And I wish more people also were talking about those. There's positive aspects of the field, but also the negative aspects too that maybe we can address.
I should say, I was too confident to be like, just don't study. I studied for it, but I would just tell you, it's not, when I was taking it, I was thinking, if I studied another 50 hours, I would never have known the answer to that question. So it's like, just trust in your training. I would take it as soon as possible after school because it's fresh in your mind, and don't worry about failure. That's a better response than don't study.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, one last question. This is something I always end with for all of my guests, but is there anything that you do to give back to yourself? Anything that you do for self-care or your mental health that, it helps you to refuel and kind of re-energize and keep you going?
So YouTube does that for me. Like YouTube is a very that is outside of my job, and it's a creative outlet. Like I am someone that has to have an exciting, I like the idea of something cool could happen. And I feel like with YouTube, every once in a while you do a video and it gets a lot of views, and it's a really, it's like this fun thing just happened. I feel so it's like it's like you're in Vegas a little bit every time you post a video, and that's exciting for me. And I play indoor soccer and run and coach my kids' soccer team. That kind of stuff is fun also. Cool. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, love that. Well, David, this has been awesome. I feel like I could talk about IO stuff with you all day. We'll have to have you on the channel again. This was such a pleasure.
I'm happy to do it, and I'll be easier to get a hold of next
time. No, you're good. No, you're good. We made it happen. That's all that matters. And, I appreciate it so much. So until next time.
Perfect. Good talking with you.